Sakekabe blog. Sakekabe blog.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 31 of Sugidama Podcast, the podcast about Japanese sake, the drink which has been around for more than 1,000 years, however, mostly took its current shape and form, so to speak, during the Edo period of 250 years of peace and prosperity in Japan. And today, I am going to talk about it. But before, let me tell you about our sponsor, London Sake, which has one of the widest selections of premium and craft sake available online today. You can choose from over 100 sake from 25 breweries, and they will deliver across the UK and many European markets. And if you don't know what sake to choose, you can use simple online tasting notes together with very sensible and affordable food pairings to help you decide. What's more, you can get a 10% discount by just using the code SUGIDAMA, all caps, during checkout. London Sake, making sake simple. My name is Alex and I live in London, the United Kingdom. In case someone wonders if it's one of the other 23 Londons around the world. No, it's not. I am certified sake specialist, sake judge, sake educator and sake advocate. Besides this podcast, I have Sugidama blog, when I write about all things sake and publish tasting notes, overviews and information about sake events happening in London. Let's get straight to the point. I think the Edo period has the same significance for sake brewing as the Victorian era in Britain for the Industrial Revolution. During that time, many brewing techniques that emerged in previous periods were refined and improved. In addition, many new techniques and methods were developed, and a lot of breweries we love today were founded during that time. The main characteristics of the period were peace, stability, and isolation. After 150 years of constant infighting, Japan was finally unified under Tokugawa rule, which continued for another 250 years. No wars, no fighting, apart from conflicts between individual samurai, things were getting better for almost everyone. Contrary to a popular opinion that Japan was completely sealed off during the Tokugawa shogunate, it is not entirely true. While most of the citizens were forbidden from traveling abroad and foreigners could not enter the country easily, Japan still maintained trade relations with China and Korea, as well as with some other Asian countries, and with the Netherlands. China and the Netherlands could use the port of Nagasaki, and there were a few daimyo, the feudal lords, who could trade with Korea, Ryukyu Kingdom, which is modern Okinawa, and Aino in Hokkaido, which at that time wasn't a part of Japan. I even heard that sake that time, probably at the beginning of Edo period, I don't know, was exported to some colonies of the Netherlands like Batavia. So what about sake? Let's first talk about the geography. During the Edo period, the center of sake making moved from Kyoto and Nara to what is now known as Hyogo prefecture. The prefecture played always a significant role in sake making. If you remember the beginning of the series, and episode 25 in particular, I was talking about a man who found some moldy rice in a shrine and made sake by using it. That story was from Harima no Kuni Fudoki, the ancient reports of provincial culture, geography, and oral tradition collected in the 7th, 8th centuries. In this case, the records were from Harima province, which is the southwestern part of present-day Hyogo prefecture. The site of this historic event, by the way, is thought to be Niwata Shrine at the present-day city of Shizo. But for centuries after that, Hyogo prefecture played a less significant role in sake brewing, which at that time was mostly concentrated around imperial capitals, first Nara and then Kyoto. However, things changed after the capital was moved to Edo, the base of the Tokugawa family at that time. There are a few factors which benefited Hyogo. First of all, the shipping route from the region was more efficient than from Kyoto. Kyoto and Nara are located inland, so the breweries had to bring sake they made first to Osaka or any other port and then ship it to Edo by sea. Hyogo Prefecture is located on the coast, so it was much easier to ship sake from there. Another reason was the taste of sake. Because of the difference in water, soft water in Fushimi, in Kyoto, and hard water in Nada, in Hyogo. You might remember it from episode 14, The Power of Water. Sake from Kyoto at that time was sweet and rich, compared to dry sake from Hyogo, which became more popular in Edo. Mind that sake during the Edo period was generally sweeter than now. And the third reason, or probably a consequence of the above, was technological advances in sake brewing achieved in Hyogo. Because there was a demand for sake from Hyogo, the breweries had resources to improve the technology and therefore develop some new techniques and some methods. One of the most important technological discoveries that happened in Hyogo was the method to make sake clear. Before, most of the sake drunk in Japan was cloudy at best, but often quite thick because of the rice lees left in the brew. The man who changed it was Yamanaka Yukimoto, or as he was better known, Kinoiki Shinroku. I was talking about him, the Kinoiki family, and Itami in episode 21, which was focused on Nigorizaki. In brief, he was a son of samurai, who was killed during the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period. So Shinroku decided to give up his samurai status. Well, his father was killed, and probably there were some people after him, after his family, changed his name and became first a merchant and then a sake brewer. The legend of discovering clear sake goes something like that. An employee who was fired from the brewery for some reason decided to take revenge and spoil new brewed sake by throwing ashes into it. When the brewery workers tried to save the fruit of their labor by filtering it, they got super clear sake. Because the ashes had bonded with the rice particles, they became heavier and it was much easier to filter them. So when they did it, they've got a crystal clear drink, which immediately became hugely popular. Another place famous for sake brewing in the early Edo period was Ikeda. It's a town near Itami, but in the Osaka prefecture now. So sake brewing in Ikeda probably started earlier than in Itami. Brewers in Ikeda inherited in a way the techniques developed by monks to remember Soboshu. So all this technology and knowledge that was accumulated in the temples and monasteries during Muromachi period and Sengoku Jidai, they in a way moved to Ikeda, used by the brewers there, and then moved to Itami and basically became the part of the sake brewing culture in Japan. So the sake from Itami and Ikeda was shipped to Kyoto, Osaka, and Edo, the three major cities at that time. In Edo, which was growing at breakneck pace, sake from the Kansai region was called kudarizaki, where kudari means go down, coming from Nada to Edo, and the production of sake was growing pretty fast. But both Itami and Ikeda were still quite far from the coast by the Edo period standards. Now you can probably get from there to Osaka in 20-30 minutes by car, but that time it was quite an expensive exercise to deliver sake to the port from a brewery, so they had to use big barrels and horses, or they used the rivers to float sake on the rivers to the coast, and it all took time and resources. So some breweries started gradually moving their production closer to the coast. The breweries ended up in 5 villages, collectively called Nadagogo, the 5 villages of Nada, including Nishinomiya, where the famous brewing water Miyamizu was discovered. And again, you can listen to the episode 14, The Power of Water, where I tell the story about the discovery of Miyamizu. So the region became known for its dry and crisp taste of sake. Now there are 26 breweries in the area, including such giants as Ozeki, Shochikubai, Sawanatsuru, Hakutsuru, and Kiko Masamune, as well as iconic Kenbishi brewery. Together they currently count for 24% of the sake shipped domestically, and it's from 2020 numbers. So it's more than any other brewing area in Japan. But I guess it's a topic for another podcast to talk about Nada and how the sake brewing developed there and what it is now. But we move on. But before, we talk about the changes in annual sake brewing pattern during the Edo period and the emergence of the Kimoto method. Let me remind you about London Sake, our sponsor, and their huge selection of curated sake sets, which provide a great opportunity to explore various styles and types of sake. Have a look, but don't forget about the magic word Sugidama, all caps, to get your 10% discount. So, before the Edo period, and for some time in the early Edo, sake was brewed throughout the year and had 5 main seasons: Shinshu, new sake; Aishu, sake brewed in the middle season; Kanmai sake, also referred as Kanmai sake, sake brewed before winter; Kanshu, sake brewed in winter; and Harusake, sake brewed in early spring. However, in 1657, the Japanese government, which was called that time Bakafu, the military government, introduced one of the first sake licensing systems, called Sakekabe, banning from making sake those who didn't hold the certification. There were a number of reasons for the government to start controlling sake brewing through Sakekabe. First of all, the system introduced a ceiling for each brewery on the amount of rice that could be used for brewing sake in a particular year. Sake at that time was considered not a luxury product, but a necessity of life, especially in the northern regions where people used it to warm up during winter. On the other hand, rice, the key ingredient of sake, was essential staple food for Japanese people, and its yield was pretty much fixed that time. If you leave it to the free market, the situation could have developed in the way that smaller breweries would not have access to enough rice, called Junmai in those days, while larger breweries would be using table rice on top of Genryumai, unbalancing the food supply. So, through the Sakekabe system, the government could control the rice consumption by sake breweries and make sure that small breweries have access to the rice they need for brewing. The next step taken by the Bakafu was to limit sake making to one season, the winter, and it happened in 1673. One of the explanations was that the sake made during warm and hot months was more prone to get spoiled and therefore wasted. But there are few other reasons. First of all, the economic reason. By limiting sake brewing to the winter season, the government made sure that farmers could work on their fields during summer and autumn, and then work as kurabita at sake breweries during winter early spring. Also, by the end of autumn, the rice was harvested, and the government knew how much of it can allow for use in sake brewing. So the government could regulate the rice market and sake market simultaneously. The new sake making regime also led to the emergence of toji as master brewers, who kept the knowledge of sake brewing methods and formed teams of brewers each winter to work on a particular brewery. So Toji guilds also started to form at that time, and there was an emergence of sake merchants as well. By that time, the technique of winter sake was well established in Itami from 1667, and what they did, they improved the preparation of kanshu, and it became the basis of Kimoto method. So the political stability largely contributed to economic development in Japan during the Edo period, which also brought a lot of innovations into sake making. First of all, the rice polishing technique was improved. If before the rice was polished manually using large pestle and mortar type utensils, or even by people stamping on it, during the Edo period, the breweries started to use water wheels to power rice polishing machines on a much bigger scale. And of course, the rice polishing at that time wasn't very high, so the maximum polishing ratio was probably 85-88%. But when you make sake on industrial scale, obviously you want to start polishing larger quantity of rice and quicker. So these polishing machines, they were not perfect, but they made life of sake brewers probably easier than before. The sake pasteurization also became much more common as brewers realized that heating up sake made it more stable. Another innovation was the addition of pure alcohol to sake to make it also more stable and achieve a particular style of sake. So it's quite interesting because the idea of adding alcohol, it's not the idea that happened during the war, during the Second World War, when it was a shortage of rice, so the government told sake brewers to start adding alcohol to increase yield. No, it's quite old technique, and it's got its roots in the Edo period. Taste-wise, sake was getting less sweet. It was still one of the main sources of sweetness for people in Edo because the people didn't have access to sugar. But the palate, the Japanese palate, was changing in the direction of drier sake during Edo period. However, the main technological advance in sake making was the emergence of a stable sake brewing method called Kimoto. So Kimoto was the first sake brewing method that produced consistent results. I was talking about it in more detail in episode 4, but here I'm going to look at Kimoto from a point of the evolution of sake brewing. So, first of all, what is Kimoto? We have to distinguish between Kimoto as a method of sake brewing, as we know it now, and Kimoto-kei, which could be translated as Kimoto school, which comprises various brewing methods, including Yamaha, for example. Here I'm going to talk only about the method. Oh, by the way, if you are interested in the technicalities of the Kimoto method, you definitely should check out the episode of the Sake Deep Dive podcast, where Jim and Andrew are talking about Kimoto in depth. I will put a link to the episode in the show notes. So the method was first mentioned in a 1687 sake brewing text, but it had existed before that, of course. Kimoto became the main dominating method of making sake for 200-300 years until the early 1900s, when it was first replaced by Yamaha, which very close to Kimoto, and then by Sokujumoto. However, Kimoto never disappeared from sake brewing. So it's possible to buy Kimoto sake now. I think Kimoto and Yamaha together account for like 9% or even less of the old sake made in Japan, but it's pretty much iconic method. So I like Kimoto, and the main characteristic taste-wise is the depth, its high acidity, its gaminess, as it's called. So it's quite interesting sake. So, from the technical point, Kimoto, which is often translated as the original method, but there are other interpretations of the kanji for key, and you can listen to the Sake Deep Dive episode, they talk about it. So the Kimoto implemented the multi-stage brewing technique, which first appeared in Bodaimoto but was developed further in Kimoto. This multi-stage technique opened a door to large-scale commercial brewing and made it possible to brew sake in large vats, such as 1800-liter Jukoku I mentioned in the last episode of the series. So the main point here, and I'm talking about this multi-stage method, is the preparation of a starter, which developed a high concentration of yeast microorganisms, which are strong enough to kick off fermentation in a larger quantity of rice and water. However, this quantity is increased gradually in 3 stages, so you don't put everything in all go. So this technique in Japanese called sandan jikomi. So nowadays, the Kimoto method is mostly associated with the technique called yamaoroshi, when brewery workers are mixing koji, inoculated rice, steamed rice, and water with long poles in a small sort of shallow tubs for several days to make the starter, moto or shubo in Japanese. The idea is to create a favorable environment for the growth of lactic bacteria, which in turn creates a lot of lactic acid, and the lactic acid keeps all the unwanted microorganisms away from the starter. So pole mixing makes life of these lactic acid bacteria easier and also improves the saccharification of starch into sugar. However, historically, the key characteristic of the Kimoto method was the development of the starter at a low temperature in order to suppress the development of yeast. So when you make this starter, the main aim that time was to increase the acidity of the starter. So after that, when you put the starter in the main fermentation, the environment is acidic enough to keep the maromi, the fermenting mash, from spoiling. You don't want the yeast to be active, so you're trying to suppress the development of yeast. Because you want the lactic acid bacteria to grow, to multiply, you want to make the environment for them much easier, and obviously in the cold environment they're quite slow. So you mash this starter with the poles to make it easier for lactic bacteria to grow, and on the other hand, you keep the temperature low so yeast doesn't start converting sugar into alcohol. So you need this precious sugar for the later stage of your brewing process. Macerating the rice and water mixture was needed to improve the development of the starter. Of course, in the Edo period, brewers couldn't control the brewing temperature during warm months. So this method could only be used in winter. The Kimoto was first developed in Nara region, where winter brewing was pretty much a norm that time. It was even known as kanmoto, when kan means cold. By the end of the Edo period, Kimoto became so ubiquitous that had the name futsumoto, a normal or usual method. You remember probably from earlier episodes, futsushu. Futsushu is ordinary sake, so moto is method of making sake, so futsumoto is ordinary method. So only when Sokujimoto was developed and became a norm, Kimoto got its current name, which means, as I said earlier, the original method. Okay, there are a few sake around that were made using recipes from the Edo period. So I'm going to feature the 2 I know. The first is Time Machine from Kinoshita Brewery, made by Philip Harper. It's brewed following a method recorded in 1712. It's, of course, Kimoto. Unfortunately, I don't have detailed tasting notes for it. I have tried Time Machine a couple of times before, and once a few years ago with Philip Harper, when Philip Harper was here in London, but I never bought it, and I definitely should do it. However, from the limited tasting notes I have, it's sweet and rich sake. You will definitely notice molasses, dried fruit, and even a bit of soy sauce in the aroma. It's sold as a dessert sake, marketed like that. But it might be a good food sake if you don't mind sweetness, and you can have rich meat dishes with it. And it's complement because it's a lot of umami, it's a lot of richness, so it will work very well with rich food, and especially meat food. And sometimes you've got these sauces, meat sauces, that a bit sweet, so it will work together very well. But you obviously can have it with dessert, or I don't know, I think it's amazing with Christmas pudding. So the polishing ratio of Time Machine is naturally very low, 88%, as it was during the Edo period. SMV, the sake meter value, is minus 45, and you will feel it. So minus means sweeter, plus means drier, and minus, and usually you have like a normal sake, it's around like from minus, let's say 5 to plus 5, something in this region. So minus 45 is huge. It's very sweet sake. The acidity is also very high, 3.1, which is a good sign of Kimoto sake. And ABV, alcohol percentage, is 14-15%. The sake has a very nice amber color, and it's a joy to drink. The second sake is Genroku Redux, which is a Junmai sake. It's brewed by Konishi Shuzo, which has been making sake for the last 460 years in Itami, the birthplace of clear sake I have talked about before. Genroku Redux was brewed using a recipe from an old book the family has in their possession, and the recipe is dated back to 1703. The specs of Genroku Redux are somehow similar to Time Machine. The rice polishing ratio is 88%, same. The sake meter value is minus 35, slightly less sweet, but I don't know if you can notice the difference between minus 45, minus 35. It's very sweet. And the acidity is 3.3. However, ABV is significantly higher, is 17.8%, because it's Gensho, undiluted sake. The brewer's website states that this sake is made with only half of the water used in modern brewing methods. And it's also Kimoto. So you can see that Kimoto gives sake this high acidity. Because again, I probably repeat myself, but the normal acidity for sake is 1.2, 1.4. So here you've got 3.0 or 3.3, so it's quite high. So Genroku Redux has a golden color and full bouquet of aromas, from figs, licorice and coffee to soy sauce, cinnamon, marmite, and even a bit of a roast. It's a full-bodied sake, sweet and smooth, with dried fruit flavors and full of umami. Similar to Time Machine, you can enjoy it on its own or with rich food like, pork belly, oily fish, like grilled oily fish, prosciutto or cheese, or both. So if you are interested in how sake tasted in the Edo period, try either Time Machine or Genroku Redux. That's it for today. I'll be back with a final episode about the evolution of sake and a few very interesting interviews. In the meantime, buy Time Machine or Genroku Redux and try it. Time Machine is available at the London Sake website, where you can get a 10% discount by entering Sugidama, all caps, at the checkout. And if you would like to buy Genroku Redux, go to the Tengu Sake website. I'll put the link in the show notes. If you have any questions or suggestions about any sake topic, just drop me a line. My email address is alex@sugidama.co.uk. You can tag me on Instagram or Twitter at sugidamablog in one word. Again, if you like the episode and want more, hit the subscribe button, and you will get every new episode downloaded to your player as soon as it's out. If you would like to give me a bit of support, please leave a review either on Apple Podcasts if you use an iPhone, iPad or Mac, or on the Podchaser website, where you can leave a review of any podcast, regardless of what platform you use to listen to it. I've got a link to my page there in the show notes. You need to register at Podchaser, but it's easy because you can use your Twitter or Facebook credentials and then leave a review. Spotify, by the way, now allows you to rate the podcast you listen to. So if you use this platform, rate Sugidama podcast there. Of course, you can share this podcast with your friends on your social media, chat apps, anywhere. Remember, you can be that friend who introduced Sugidama podcast and sake to somebody. Thanks a lot for listening. Kampai.
Sugidama blog. Sugidama blog.